Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and hello everyone. We are from Group AC10 for the subject Principle of Macroeconomics. Today we will present about the issue of inflation. The topic of inflation that we will discuss in this presentation, which is the introduction of inflation, types of inflation, the factors of inflation, the positive and negative effects of inflation, and also how to control this inflation. I hope you all will understand and enjoy it.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Amira Ashraf bin Muhammad Sapri, and today I'm going to talk about the introduction of inflation. So first of all, what is inflation? When defining inflation, it alleged causes are frequently used. When there is more money than there are available goods and services, inflation results. Or fiscal deficit financing is blamed for inflation. The excess money creation could be used to finance a budget deficit. However, a condition of monetary expansion or a budget deficit may not result in an increase in the price level. This explains why inflation is so difficult to define. Instead of focusing on the cost of only one or two items, inflation can be defined as a continued increase in general price level of goods. Inflation also may be described as a prolonged upward trend in the general level of prices. According to G. Ackley, inflation is a consistent and significant increase in the general level or average of prices. In other words, inflation is a situation of increasing prices that are not yet extremely high. Inflation is not a result of high prices, but rather a rising level of prices. Thus, it results in an overall rise in price level. It also might be seen as a devaluation of the value of money. In other words, inflation lessens the value of money as a medium of exchange. Currently, $1 may purchase less. Another way to think that inflation is a cyclical occurrence. When calculating inflation, we consider a vast number of goods and services that the populace of a nation uses and then compute the average increase in those prices over time. A slight price increase an abrupt price increase are not indicators of inflation because they could be caused by the short-term market dynamics. Furthermore, inflation is a state of disequilibrium that develops where there is a consistent increase in price level. It should be noted at this point, if the cost of most products increase, there is inflation. Both modest and quick price increases are possible in this case. On the other hand, it can be challenging to determine whether prices are rising and whether this tendency is long-lasting. Lastly, it is challenging to define inflation in a straightforward manner because of this. Next, I will explain about the types of inflation. So uh, the first type of inflation is creeping inflation, which is the rate of inflation is below 10% and does not outpace the rate of output growth. Next, it is galloping inflation. Galloping inflation range from 10% to 100% and occurs when the rate of inflation exceeds the rate of output growth. People hold as little money as possible as money loses its purchasing power. The next type of inflation is hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is out of control inflation, a state in which prices rise quickly while a currency loses value. Over 100% annual hyperinflation is the norm. Both earnings and prices are very variable. Money has no intrinsic value, thus barter trade, which is involved exchanging one product for another, emerge. Another type of inflation is open inflation, which is is if a rising price level coincides with an economic imbalance. Next, another type of inflation is suppressed inflation. This inflation occurs if state officials use administrative measures to slow or even halt the growth in the price level. Existence of scarce items, the shadow economy and the others follows such a situation. In such circumstances, the government establishes price controls on commodities to regulate the supply of fundamental necessities like agricultural items. The last type of inflation is hidden inflation. To stop price inflation, the government enforces rigorous regulations, forcing producers to sell their goods at the set rates. Lower product quality results from producers being unable to market their goods for bigger profit margins. This implies that businesses are charging more for inferior goods, indicating hidden inflation. For the next part, I will explain more about the factors that cause inflation. The first factors that cause inflation is demand pull or excess demand. Inflation that is caused by high or excess demand is called demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation is defined as a situation where lots of money is used to obtain a small quantity of goods. When there is an increase in the average price due to surplus demand at a point of full employment, inflation occurs. With reference to the figure, a price increase from P to P prime results from an increase in demand from AD to AD prime at full employment output level. Next, the factor that causes inflation is increase in cost. Increase in production costs will force producers to shift their burden to consumers by increasing the selling prices. This inflation is called cost push inflation. For instance, the production expenses of the company will rise if the workers' union wants a pay rise. Supply will decline at all price levels as costs rise. According to the figure, cost increases will cause the price to rise from P to P prime and the supply curve to shift left from AS to AS prime. This condition will persist because a rise in the cost of items will result in a decrease in a person's real incomes. In addition, another factor that causes inflation is supply shock. The production cost of fundamental products might alter significantly as a result of supply shock. For instance, the agriculture industry could suffer greatly from a protracted and severe drought. Food cost increases may result from it. Most businesses that use gasoline in their manufacturing suffer when gas prices rise because their costs rise. As a result, the final product will eventually become much more expensive, causing inflation. Last but not least, the factor that causes inflation is adaptive expectations. Consumer expectations of inflation can also result in its occurrence. This psychological element is crucial to the study of social science. People will buy products in advance of price increases if they anticipate price increases. Price increases due to an increase in demand will result in inflation. Adaptive expectation inflation is the name given to inflation caused by this psychological aspect.
Next is the positive effects of inflation in Malaysia. Let's go. There are a few positive effects of inflation in Malaysia, which is an increased economic activity, improved creditworthiness, higher profits for businesses, improved competitiveness, and also increased government revenue. The first positive effects of this inflation is increased economic activity. Inflation can stimulate economic activity by encouraging consumers to make purchases sooner rather than later, as they expect price to rise in the future. This can lead to increased sales and production, which can be beneficial for businesses and employment. Another positive effect of inflation is improved creditworthiness. Inflation can make it easier for businesses and individuals to pay off their debt as the value of money decreases over time. This can lead to improved creditworthiness and access to credit. Next, which is higher profits for businesses. As price rise, businesses may see increased profits as they can charge more for their goods and service. This can be especially beneficial for companies that are able to pass on their higher costs to consumers. Ultimately, improved competitiveness can be another one of the positive effects of inflation. Inflation can make domestic goods and services more competitive in the international market as they become cheaper relative to goods and services produced in other countries. This can be beneficial for exporters and the overall trade balance. Last but not least, increased government revenues. Inflation can lead to increased government revenues as tax revenues rise along with price. This can be used to fund public spending on infrastructure, education, and other priorities.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Aziza binti Abdul Aziz. Despite the positive effect that have been presented by Nabila just now, there are also some negative impacts that we can get from the inflation. So I will continue to discuss and present about the negative impacts of inflation. First and foremost, in short term, inflation will encourage the increase of national production if only the factors of production are not fully utilized. Price hike is assigned to producers that they can reap more profit if they increase their production. However, if production is already utilizing few resources, inflation will only increase the price, not the production. This means when the production is low, the demand is high, thus the price of a product is higher. Therefore, early medium-sized inflation that has not utilized the full resources will bring about an increase in national production. Okay, next, let's move to the second effect of inflation. Inflation causes the purchasing power to shrink, which is drop in the value of money. This means that those who hold wealth in the form of cash will suffer losses. The situation encourages people to spend and hence reduce their saving. Saving money is an important part of accumulating wealth and ensuring a secure financial future. Saving money provides a way out of life uncertainties and allows you to live a more fulfilling life. This is because we cannot predict what will happen to us in the future. Thus, if people only have small amount of saving, that because their saving is used during the inflation, they will face hurdles in the future. Besides, inflation also affects different peoples with different ways. For example, those who work for a fixed salary will suffer losses. This is because price hikes will deteriorate the value of money. Individuals with fixed salaries will suffer from reduced purchasing power. This is because they receive a same monthly payment, but the products in market are high in price. Thus, he cannot purchase many products at the same time. The same effect is felt by the retirees who receive pensions. Those who are fond of saving either in saving account or through the purchase of government bonds will also suffer losses. The interest rate received on their savings could be lower than the inflation rate. Next, inflation causes uneven distribution of income between those who borrow the money and those who lend out the money. Those who borrow will reap some benefits because the actual value of the repayment will deteriorate, although the same amount repaid will be the same. The actual value of some, measured based on the number of goods that can be purchased, has decreased. Therefore, those who lend out the money will suffer losses because the same amount has a lower purchasing power. Last but not least, inflation also brings about a balance of trade deficit. This means cash outflow is more than cash inflow into the country. If the capital account does not change, it will cause the country's balance of payment to suffer a deficit. Thus, when a country has a balance of payment deficit, it imports more goods, services, and capital than it exports. To pay for its imports, it must borrow from the other countries because we do not have enough money to pay for the imports. In the long run, the country becomes a net consumer of the world's economic output rather than the producer. At some point, a very high balance of payment deficit can cause a loss of confidence by foreign investors. Therefore, the investor will remove their investment, causing a big fall in the value of money currency in our country.
The next is how to control this inflation. There are several ways to control this inflation, which is monetary policy, fiscal policy, price controls, exchange rate policy, and supply side policies. Monetary policy is one of the way to controlling this inflation. Central banks can use monetary policy to control inflation by adjusting interest rates. When interest rates are high, it becomes more expensive for individuals and businesses to borrow money, which can slow down spending and economic growth. This can lead to a decrease in inflation. The next way to control inflation is fiscal policy. Governments can also use fiscal policy to control inflation by adjusting government spending and taxation. Cutting government spending can slow down economic growth and decrease inflation. Raising taxes can also slow down spending and decrease this inflation. Other than that, inflation can be controlled with a price control. Governments can also use price control to control disinflation. Price controls are government mandated minimum or maximum price for certain goods and services. Price control can also keep price low, but they can also lead to shortages and black market. An exchange rate policy is also a way to control disinflation. A country can attempt to control inflation by manipulating its exchange rate. The depreciation of the exchange rate can make imports more expensive, which can lead to lower inflation. However, a depreciation of the exchange rate can also lead to a decrease in the value of the country's currency and an increase in the cost of the servicing debts. Last but not least is supply side policies. Government can also focus on improving productivity and increasing the supply of goods and service. By increasing the supply of goods and service, the government can decrease the cost of goods and service, which can lead the lower inflation. That's all for the way to control the inflation.
To conclude, inflation generally refers to continued increase in general price levels. General price reflects the price for all goods and services that exist in the economy at any given time. As we can see, there are several types of inflation, for example, creeping inflation and galloping inflation. We also must know about the factors that causes inflation, and then there are positive effect of inflation because there are negative effect of inflation. Thus, we have ways um, to control the inflation. So that's all from our group. Thank you.